I also really like helping people who have yet to make their sexual debut and work through that process of
virgins.
Yes, I don't use that word. I don't believe there's such a thing. We don't call it a name for a person who has never driven a car, like, oh, you're a different type of human.
Right. Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Talks. Today we're going to try something new, a change in format. And while the length is going to stay about the same, I'm no longer going to be the only face on camera. I'm going to do a series where I invite a guest on with an interesting topic to discuss. And my first guest today is Jesse Jones.
Hi there.
Who is a family and sex therapist in San Diego, where we both live. And we met 4 years ago when I first moved here.
Yes.
Jesse follows me on BAMMER.33 on Instagram. We started chatting, and then we got together and met. And we've gone to the local clothing optional beach a few times. We've gone to, I had a salon or two that Jesse attended. We went to a nude movie night that he co-hosted. And we're today going to discuss his career and his attitude about sex.
Yeah.
And as a sex therapist, the first thing I want to do is to ask you, Jesse, how did you get involved in this, and what is a sex therapist?
Okay, so that's two questions. So I'll go from the very first thing is a sex therapist, which is by far the most common question I get is, what is it? We are a standard therapist. You may find them as a counselor, a social worker, or a licensed marriage and family therapist like myself that just works in the field of sex, sexuality, gender, anything kind of related to sex or sexual functioning. That's kind of an easy answer to come up with what a sex therapist is. It was actually a really long road for me to become a sex therapist, but essentially I was inspired by the works of another therapist named Kyoko Lane, who works in San Francisco. And I was reading this great book called The Feminist Porn Book, The Politics of Producing Pleasure. And this therapist, Kyoko Lane, was working with the gender queer community, agendered community, non-binary community. And she was helping her clients by viewing queer and feminist pornography to help them kind of understand what sex might be like for a person who doesn't really want to be viewed as male and or female. So that was kind of, when I was reading that, it was what inspired me to really enter this field legitimately.
The first thought that comes to my mind is that in many ways, pornography has been destabilizing. It has led many people in current generations to believe that the sex they see on a screen, which is obviously manufactured, is the way the sex in their lives ought to transpire. And of course, that's usually not possible. So was there a way to take that issue out of the sex when you're dealing with the non-gender or gender non-binary community, or did she demystify it despite the fact that it sometimes misrepresents reality?
Well, a lot of the work that she was using was working with a lot of renegade people. This was way back. I read this book way back in 2013. So as you can imagine, we've progressed quite a bit. That representation just wasn't really as prevalent, but this existed in more of some of the underground pornography scenes where, like I said, it's feminist and queer pornography. So they were a little bit more cautious and careful about what they presented on film. Gotcha. Being a little bit less performance-based and more, I don't want to say actual sex-based, but
maybe
certainly
less fantasy.
Yeah, you could say less fantasy. Right. You can definitely say that. Yes, of course. As it goes now, there is a lot of mainstream non-binary, genderqueer, agendered porn, though. And there are a lot of actors who are now actively in the community and are really successful at what they're doing.
Are you going to be specializing in the communities you just mentioned, or are you going to take anybody who's part of the LGBTQ spectrum or even the broader world?
I actually take the broader world. So there's this great terminology that we use in the field for the gender, relationship, sexuality, diversity, or gender, sexuality, relationship diversity. It represents the entire spectrum from a heteronormative straight cisgendered couple that are married in a monogamous relationship
Right.
to a queer polycule full of a bunch of different individuals
I've
with different
recently been
identities.
hearing about names I can't even remember that range from describing someone who goes back and forth between being homo and heterosexual based on who knows what, to people who, for example, the closer they get to someone, the less interested they become.
Yes, there's a lot of terminology out there. One of the things that I like to do with my clients is I actually go through the list of different names and different, as it keeps getting added and subtracted. And I like to actually explore all of it together and then really have deep conversations about which labels seem to fit them, what doesn't seem to fit them, what do they personally think sounds a little, does this really need a label or not? And which ones to them feel like we could create our own label from this. And then we talk about identity politics in general, going, do we even need a label? And so I like to do that with each of my clients because I think for every person it's a little bit different. So that's a little bit of the work that I do.
What are some of the issues that are maybe most likely to pop up? Yeah, I know you're in the process of establishing your independent practice as a sex therapist, having been a family therapist for the last few years.
Well, I've been a sex therapist for the last few years. When I went to school, I knew exactly what I was going to become. So all of the therapy training that I've been working towards has been working towards becoming a certified sex therapist. I'm not certified yet. I'm just a sex therapist. I have my certificate of completion from the University of Michigan.
What does it take to become certified then?
Okay, to become a certified sex therapist, I actually don't think I'm allowed to fully explain, but let me go through the process.
You're not allowed to, or it's too complicated?
I actually just read this in the bylaws of our organization. It's called ASECT, American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. They really prefer not to say, oh, I'm working on my certification or I'm working on becoming certified, or they don't really, you can talk about the process. Obviously you need to know, they just don't want to confuse people.
Okay.
Because sex therapist is not a protected term. As soon as you become a therapist of any kind, you can call yourself a sex therapist. That is not a legally protected term. Yeah. But usually us in the sex therapy field will usually devote our time to extra education or following different steps or joining different organizations and really becoming immersed in the community in this topic to find our specializations and niches in each case.
What are some of the types of issues and problems facing clients that you expect to be most common? I'm sure there are many that are arcane and are one-offs, but what are the things that you wouldn't be surprised to see?
One of the most common complaints that we get from people who identify as cis men in particular come in with erectile dysfunction or delayed ejaculation, certain issues like that, sexual functioning. You can also have a lot of people who are assigned female at birth, a lot of cis women, a lot of trans men. They come in for either painful sex or I believe it's called delayed, it's not delayed ejaculation, but there is something akin to it. Yeah, I would have to look up the actual term itself. But a lot of times what you might expect a lot of people to actually have challenges with, either they have a difficult time maintaining or getting an erection. You have a lot of people who don't experience orgasm. You can have a whole slew of issues related to sexual functioning. And so that's what most of the time people are coming in to resolve. It can also happen where I'm a marriage and family therapist, so I do a lot of, I would prefer the term relational therapist, but that hasn't been changed officially yet. You may have people coming in for relationship issues that are related to having different relationship styles. One might want to be non-monogamous, one might want to be monogamous. You may have them coming in with different sexual desire discrepancy. So one may want to have sex a lot, one may want to have sex not that much. You may also have people that are just interested in sex differently or different sexual practices. So what I like to do is I like to work with a lot of non-monogamy. especially opening up people to that, opening up relationships with that. I like to work with BDSM and kink and other outlier sexualities. And I like to work with LGBTQ issues. And then I also do like to do what Kyoko Lang did, which is kind of gender affirming sex therapy, where I'm helping people who are currently transitioning their genders or their sex, or however they would like to conceptualize their transition. And I am helping them kind of rediscover sexuality in that way. I also really like helping people who have yet to make their sexual debut and work through that process of
Virgins.
Yes, I don't use that word. I don't believe there's such a thing. We don't call it a name for a person who has never driven a car, like, oh, you're a different type of human.
Right.
So I like the phrase sexual debut. I believe it was coined by Doug Braun Harvey, who's an amazing sex therapist in the field and lives in San Diego.
Wow. So how will you build your practice since you're just beginning?
Well, I'm currently in the process of working at a couple of other clinics and trying to get established in some other clinics where I can take insurance-based clients. I'm also just working at one of the therapy platforms that provide services for non-insurance clients. I am really just kind of building my own capital and then looking to find a CPA and another lawyer who kind of works with starting up this business. And just like any kind of business, you jump through red tape and big hoops and everything else. There's still the amount of bureaucracy.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say about the business or the field that we haven't covered? Again, this is only meant to be a 10-minute or so interview, but I want to give you the opportunity to describe it and define it, and I want to give our audience the opportunity to get exposed to the idea of what sex therapy really means.
One of my favorite things currently about the field that the general public may not be aware about is that it is becoming a lot more diverse, especially from back in the day. Sex therapists used to just kind of be, you would go to the conferences, and as I was told, you would just see kind of a bunch of white men around. Right. And then about 10, 15 years ago, from what I was told, you would see a bunch of white women leading the organization. I had the privilege of going to the ASECT sexuality conference in San Francisco last year, and it was amazing. And there you saw people with disabilities. You saw every single kind of ethnic group kind of being represented. You saw queer people, you saw trans people, you saw gay people, you saw a whole slew and plethora of people who are just really doing some amazing work in bringing some of the underrepresented voices that have been in this field, just like any other field, and really starting to change the game and change the dynamic.
Well, representation matters.
Representation matters in a lot of ways. And we have this amazing new president for ASECT, and I'm very lucky to say that I actually had her as a professor at one point. So that was really awesome that I got to meet her ahead of time and really got to see before she became the president. So I'm really excited to see what she does with it.
Well, thank you for explaining this to us and for being my first guest in this new format. I look forward to hearing about the amazing success you're going to experience.
Thank you.
And of course, to continue to be your friend and going to all the fabulous events that we get invited to in San Diego.
Yes, and thank you for everything you do and everything that you have done. I have been a tremendous fan. For your fans, if they don't know, I discovered you through the AIDS Memorial on Instagram, and in my undergraduate, I minored in history, so just seeing kind of an accidental gay historian was just amazing, and I'm so grateful that I connected with you, and that when you moved, I made sure to stay in contact with you, saying, I will be your friend. I would love to talk to you, and I'm really grateful that you asked me to be here.
I'm glad you did. So as an aside, for those of you who are watching this and have not yet subscribed, please do. I'm about to cross the 5,000 person Rubicon on YouTube, and I'd like to do that soon. And secondly, for those not aware, I'm going to be featured in my first photographic exhibit during the month of October in San Diego at the Studio Door Gallery, a 10-year-old LGBTQ gallery here. I will I believe, be given a link to a photographic walkthrough of that collection. So for those who aren't in San Diego and can't attend it in person, if you contact me once I have the link, I'll be happy to share it with you. In the meantime, be well, stay perfectly LGBTQ, and we'll be seeing you again soon with another episode of BAMMER Talks. Thank you.